Again, thank you for being here today. I'm Yuli from Workplace Pride. I'm Director of Program Development. And I'm delighted to have two wonderful panels today. Jose from Unilever, Ronald from KPN. And I will have them, let them introduce themselves later on. But so today's topic, the members exchange topic is how to best arrange sustainable leadership support in your organization. And whether you're from the community or you're an ally or HR practitioner or leader, the managers, we're all sometimes struggle to get the kind of support needed to move the needle in the organization, because we can't transform the organizational culture alone. Leadership is needed to be involved, HR is needed to be involved, and we can't have enough supporters and allies in this movement. And here I'd like to share, well, Jose and Ronald were kind enough to share their experiences, how they're advancing LGBTIQ plus inclusion in their organizations and attracting leaders and allies in this movement. So without further ado, I'd like to start with Jose. Would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jose. As Yuli mentioned, I'm joining from Unilever. I'm a global HR business partner for a nutrition business. I've been with Unilever for 7 years, and since I started with Unilever, I've always been active in our local Proud network. Yep, that's the short and sweet version of the introduction.
Thanks, Jose. And Ronald?
Yes, and now I'm on the computer, so it worked. So I'm very happy, so I can also see you. Yes, my name is Ronald Nieuwenhuis. Obviously a very Dutch name. So yes, I'm coming from the Netherlands, living in Amsterdam, working for KPN. I think this month 15 years, which is quite long since I'm only 35. Currently, I'm head of diversity and inclusion at KPN, and I do this job with a lot of passion and love for the topic, and I do this for 4 years now.
Awesome. So the first, I think, half an hour or a little bit more is about sharing their best practices, and also the rest 15 to 20 minutes towards the end, I'd like to open the floor for open Q&A space so that everybody can ask questions to Jose or Ronald, or maybe other members in today's session. Okay, so Jose, can you tell us your role in fostering LGBTIQ plus inclusion in your organization? So what are your roles in this area?
Yeah, so I think from the HR perspective, it's sort of like all of the HR business partners are expected to play a role in ED&I. How that takes place, whether it's making sure there's an EDI lens when we're looking at talent appointments, at promotions, that's one thing. And then there's obviously the volunteer work that happens through the local Proud network. I think it's been 3 years now since we've also established internally a global Proud network. So there's also the part of making sure that we in the Netherlands connect to the global network, try to understand what they're doing, and try to see what are the global best practices that we can land in our market. And so in the past few years, sort of like part of what how I've been involved for the Proud network itself, I am the one leading the submission for the Workplace Pride benchmark that we've been doing now for 4 years. I'm also part of the HR team that then went to craft and implement our local gender transition policy. So that's just a few examples of how I've been leading for ED&I, specifically for LGBTQ plus in the role that I'm doing right now.
Okay, so you're an HR professional handling DEI broadly, not only LGBTIQ plus, but also you're active in LGBTIQ plus ERG group.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. Thanks. And Ronald?
Yeah, well, I'm dedicated for the topic of DEI, so also, of course, including LGBTIQ plus, part of the proud part of the community itself. And the thing is that when I started 4 years ago, there was already a great internal network, which was very active. I think in 2011 or 12, We had a new CFO, Chief Financial Officer, which was Jan Kees de Jager. You might know him, obviously also out as a gay man. And that was really helpful also in already getting some right activities and strategies to have some more LGBT inclusion. I work within HR, so also like when it comes to policies, for example, for rainbow families or for trans persons, I'm accountable for that, and I embedded those things in our CLA. And our CLA is quite big. I mean, we still have 11,000 employees in the Netherlands, so it's a mini society on itself, I will say.
Okay, so you're also an HR professional, but also active in the ERG group, LGBTIQ+.
Yeah, so
ERG.
you know, I think it's all very important to that an ERG is not like an extension of HR. So it should have some autonomy, of course. So I'm involved. I help to have the right interventions placed in the bigger picture of our HR programs. But also, please be yourself in this and make sure you have enough autonomy. Yeah.
I think that this is a great advice too. And I'm just curious, we have about 40 people today, and how many of you are HR practitioners? Can you raise your hands if you are in HR or HR professionals? Okay, great. Or digital hand or physical hand, either. Perfect. Okay. So quite a few HR professionals. And then how many of you are joining because you're involved in ERG group? Okay, great. Awesome. I think the one already the kind of a best practice or advice is come from this short introduction is that it's good to have I see a lot of sort of combination, often the HR professionals who are active in an ERG, but ERG should have autonomy or the kind of independence from HR as well. And then when needed, you involve HR, right? Changing the policy, and then you can't change a lot of things without HR. And also ERG can be the advisor or advisory board to HRs to recommend or give advice on for example, transition policy for transgender professionals. Okay, great. So Ronald, how was your experience in finding a sponsor or gaining leadership support in your activities? Just to share your journey, was it easy at the beginning or hard, or how did it begin?
Yeah, so just like I said, when I started, we still had our Jan Kees de Jager CFO. So yeah, you have a sponsor in the board of the company. I think that's the best place for having the right sponsorship, also in terms of getting the right budget and priority, and also addressing things that are not going so well. So, but he left a few years ago. So then it's time to find a new sponsor. And actually what I try to do is to have sponsorship for the whole theme, and not specifically per group, because that's where I had the discussion with the board of management at KPM. Like, hey, we can choose like a person who's really an ally for a specific group. Or we really believe in it all, and we can also exchange the role models in the several networks. And that's really helpful, because sometimes we have a board member, for example, who has an Iranian background, and it's very interesting to hear him about LGBT topics. So that's how we do a little bit mix and matching, but we have a full support of the whole board, and also our network 60, which is like our top 60. They are involved in the D&I topic.
Okay. And how was your experience, Jose, in finding sponsor or support or decision makers involved in your activities?
Yeah, so I think for us in Unilever, and I think for those who are very active in their ERGs, I think we share a very, or maybe not, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we share a very similar journey, that usually in the beginning of an ERG being set up, it's sort of like just volunteers trying to do activities, and then you try to look for leadership support, but then it's less organized. So it becomes we want to arrange something for International Coming Out Day. Which leader can give us a budget? And so it's sort of like on its way to professionalism, for the lack of a better term. I think what was critical for us when it comes to how our network has grown, and I believe Frank, who is our ERG lead, is also in this call. When Hanneke Faber, who is our current nutrition president, joined Unilever, she was really very quickly also very proactive in looking for the network, not just specifically for the Proud Network, but she wanted to understand, okay, what are the different ERGs in Unilever? How can I get involved? What help that is needed from me? And so once you have a leader sort of like at that level who proactively reaches out to ERGs, and then when we met with her, she actually committed to giving us a budget, then it also sort of like turns around the way of working for the ERG to move towards, having an activity here and there to now having an actual budget, which means there's actual accountability because someone is giving us budget to move things forward. Therefore, sort of like it almost reignites the network, because then when someone gives you a bag of money and says, go ahead and run with it, there's that accountability of, okay, how do we best use the budget that's given to us? But also, how do we make sure that we consistently report on how we're using the budget and what is the impact on the organization? Yeah.
Yeah, I also see Hanneke to give a presentation about at a big conference in FMCG and the women and equity in FMCG conference. So she's not only supportive of LGBTQI plus ERG, but different ERG groups that I see. So maybe it's an idea for people here today just to kind of check out your leaders, who's active in what field, and if they're not active in LGBTIQ plus ERG, maybe you can reach out to them and introduce the LGBT Rainbow ERG to say, share your struggles and challenges in acquiring budgets and resources in your initiatives and activities. That might be a good idea too. And Jose, related to this question of how to find your sponsor in leadership supporting your initiatives, would you say Hanneke's support was quite significant in terms of for you to acquiring like a budget, like a resources, like a budgets and other resources?
Well, we did have sort of like budgets before, but it's mostly funded by people in the network themselves who are in leadership roles, who just specially carve out a part of their budget so that we can do the basics. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until we've had a senior leader who is then who said themselves that I want to be a sponsor of the network that we got things formalized. And I think echoing a bit what Ronald is saying, sort of like now that we actually have a dedicated ED&I manager in the Benelux, it's part of the conversations I'm having is indeed what Ronald is saying. How do you pool the resources together so you have a fixed budget versus having different ERGs trying to shop around different leaders and saying, can you support us with this? Can you support us with that? Then it becomes more strategic, because then once you have a pot that's there, it is sort of like how that is distributed becomes a question of, okay, what is actually our strategic intent for the next year and the years to come versus this ERG having this activation needs X amount of euros and sort of like not knowing where to pull the resources from. I think one of the other important things by having a centralized budget is that it guarantees that whether the person giving the budget for a project or for an ERG, if they move out, if they change roles, if they change countries, suddenly the network that gets that support faces a gap, because then this person promised me a budget, but then they've left. How do I fund my project now? If you have that centrally, it also helps in sort of like making sure that the ERGs and how they're set up is more sustainable in that way.
Okay, so before I pass it on to Ronald, I see Jaco has a question to Jose. So you told that you have to present the impact of your actions on the business. So how do you measure this impact on a quantitative scale? So how do you make it sort of measure, to present something measurable or tangible when it comes to business impact?
Yeah, when it comes to sort of like impact of the actions that we're doing, actually our evidence of that is the Workplace Pride benchmark. When we started doing the benchmark 4 years ago, it was a sobering report because we started at 25%. And so year on year, as we do it and as we allow the results of the benchmark to shape our agenda, that's what we can take back to the leaders and say, you gave us the budget, we're doing this benchmark to measure how we're doing, and they can see year on year that our scores are improving, which means we are moving the needle forward when it comes to LGBTQI plus inclusion. On a global level, Unilever participates in 3 different benchmarks. So in the US, we do HRC. In the UK and I believe in India, they're both doing Stonewall benchmarks. I believe there's also a local one in for India now. And from the Netherlands, we're doing Workplace Pride. So we're trying to not only use one benchmark, but actually use a number of benchmarks to make sure that we're sort of like not dropping the ball, and we're very much aware of the gaps that we have, things we still need to work with, and sort of like having those results also gives you, not only as a network but as an HR professional, sort of like the data tells you the story. This is objective. This the status of inclusion specifically for LGBTQI plus people. How do you want to move the needle, and what are the actions we can actually take to move the needle?
Awesome. So the quantitative data will help you have sort of a constructive discussion as to why investment is needed and how you're making progress in the area. So Ronald, how was it your experience in terms of getting sort of leadership support, but also budget, tangible, like a budget or resources in the area?
Yeah, so I think it also relies a bit on the question of Omar. He's asking like, how can you ensure that the LGBTIQ plus agenda remains high on the priority list? The thing is that what I tried to do the last 4 years is really make the whole topic part of the total business strategy and integrate it in everything we do. Because what I don't believe anymore is that using this topic as something standalone or is very helpful, and it doesn't help us accelerate in inclusion. So what I really did is like embedding it in our code of conduct, that make it explicit that we don't accept harassments against people from our community, and just not only based on gender or race, but also make the community explicit. Also embedded in our CLA that we have these policies, just mentioning it, and also part of our internal leadership development programs. We want leaders that are inclusive. If you're not an inclusive leader yet, then we will help you. But if you choose not to be an inclusive leader, sorry, there's no room for you anymore. And we're very strict in this. And also we measure that in our regular pulses. And when it comes to allocating budget, I have 3 flows. So I have not one central budget. I have my budget where I pay like all my memberships. There's also the membership of Workplace Pride. And of course, I have some room for innovation. Then I have a budget in a foundation, and the foundation is an internal foundation where we organize activities for leisure time for all our employees, and the ERGs are part of that foundation. So they have the autonomy of their own budget. And the nicest thing is that the bigger the network is, the more budget they have. So there's also a little bit incentive of the network to really gain the amount of members, and also in terms of allies. But the most important there is that they can choose what they want to do with that budget. So I don't have to give them approval. They can decide themselves. And this is really thousands of euros. So it's also a serious budget. And the last one is and that's what I always say, put the money where the mouth is. So if we as a company say it's important and we want to do something with a lot of impact, then the company has to pay. So I used, then I tried to find a sponsorship. For example, marketing could be a good one when it comes to more like exposure in terms of Amsterdam Pride, for example. But also what we did is financially fund a chair on University of Leiden for 5 years to do more research on LGBT inclusion on the in the workplace. And this was sponsored from our finance department. So it's really important to make sure you have the sponsorship also in terms of money, because yeah, if we say it's important, then we also put some budget to it and use this autonomy in the ERGs. Yeah.
Okay, great. So whether you're an HR practitioner or ERG activist or active person, it's really important. I'm hearing it's important to position LGBTIQ plus inclusion as business imperative, connecting with the organizational value, so that leadership will understand, like, or listen and understand why it's important in your organization. And Ronald, in the process, did you encounter any sort of, because I hear all the great stories of your success story, but did you experience any sort of the obstacles or challenges or bottleneck in the process? And then can you also share how you sort of tackle them?
Of course. Yeah, well, also like when it was about like integrating policies for rainbow families or trans persons, of course, you also have people who are like, what is the business case of this? So, and that feels like very rational to ask these questions when it comes to such a sensitive topic, because it's also going about me when I would have to like to have children, for example. And so, and then the other one is like, especially for example, this summer, when we had a campaign during Amsterdam Pride, where of course the theme of Amsterdam was my gender, my pride. There were some conservative marketing people saying, should we be involved in the discussion of gender identity? Because what I noticed, this was his quote, what I notice is that children get confused sometimes, and maybe that's not a role in the Dutch society. So this is really a belief someone has, which you have to tackle. And what's very helpful, and that's why I always say, make it integral part of your way of working and everything, because you can always rely on that. Hey, I hear you saying this. I hear you asking for the business case, but if we want to be inclusive, but we also promise to our customers, to the Dutch society, then this shouldn't be an issue anymore. And because we agreed on it on a strategic level, and that's I know that is really helpful, because then it's also sometimes we need to be forcing a bit of those opinions, and that's okay. So when it's top-down arranged in this, then that is helpful. Hannah, I work for Capian, so the telecom company. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ronald. And how about you, Jose? I know you found Hanneke as a strong supporter from leadership, and then, but until then, or even after that, did you experience any sort of struggles and challenges in terms of moving the needle with the LGBTIQ plus ERG group?
No, so for us, I think we're very lucky in the network. I think after Hanneke joined Unilever, and obviously that's been a great benefit to the network, because yeah, we have a budget, we have a senior leader to actually report to, and we're accountable to. I think sort of like the journey that we've taken so far is trying to understand also how do we then maximize right now. Actually, in the past 2 years, I think we've grown the network in the Netherlands, so much so that there's so many new members and allies who want to be involved. And so right now, the work that the network is doing, at least the leadership of the network is doing, is to try and organize the network into different work streams to make sure that, you don't have a pool of people coming to you and say, hey, I want to help, and then how can I help? And then there's no clear answer. So we're trying to understand sort of like what are the main buckets of activities that we do as a network, who are the people who have had experience in those activities and maybe can lead the work streams. One thing that we've just recently did is we also sent out a survey to the network to understand how are we actually doing as a network. Are our members happy? Do they think that we're doing enough? Do they think we can explore more partnership with externals? What are we missing? And so to actually have the members of the network, those with energy to spare, and be able to leverage that by asking the network to co-create our agenda for next year. And I think that's very important, so that the members of the network also feel like they own the agenda rather than just waiting for a project to drop and see if they're interested in it or not. Yeah.
Awesome. So when it comes to fostering LGBTIQ plus inclusion on the work floor, of course, leadership support and ERG budget and activities are important, but also kind of grassroots the ERG group's activity. And then we can't have enough allies, right? And how is it at Unilever, like a sort of recruiting allies? So they're coming from people from the community, but also people identify kind of in between, you know, the queer group, but also sort of cis hetero, the vast majority. How is it going with the recruiting allies from that pool?
Yeah, I think for us, again, very lucky that it wasn't such a hard journey to find allies in Unilever. I think the question though is, how do we get them involved? How do we make sure that they're not, just there for show? Because of the activities that we do that are fun and they like to show up. So we're trying to build sort of like, okay, what is our program for our allies? Last year, we started our first cross network activity, which of course you joined and facilitated. So for the first time, we did a workshop on with our female network, with our counterparts in the lead network, and try to understand how can we as two networks actually work together, what are the common challenges we face in the workplace, just to develop that sense of empathy and understanding. For us in the Proud Network, it was important for us to understand, okay, what are actually the challenges that women face? How are they similar? How can we actually stand up for one another? And also what we're trying to do as well is to try to strategically use activities to drum roll. Like, for example, when we participate in Rotterdam Pride, that's sort of like our call for everyone to get involved. And then we sort of like, okay, if you show up at Rotterdam Pride, chances are high that you'll get a ticket to our Amsterdam Pride boat, if that makes sense. So we try to make sure that people understand that it's not just a party. We need you to show up the entire year and not just during Amsterdam Pride. So it's really about creating those opportunities for different ERGs to come together and understand sort of like the common struggle and where we can leverage working together than working in our own individual bubbles.
Yeah, it was such an amazing the opportunity for me to come to your session, the Women in LGBTIQ+, like you said, described it eloquently, like a shared challenges that we experience in the workplace and how we can support each other. And that brought sort of the whole women ERG group on board with the LGBTIQ+ ERG group. So that was great. Thanks, Jose. Ronald, so can you share a little bit of your experience in the areas? Do you work with another ERG group, for example, women group, or different part of the group?
Yeah, so we have currently 5 ERGs, and the 6th one is on his way or on her way. I don't know yet.
Their way.
On their way. Yes, so we have the Capian Pride. Obviously, we have a cultural diversity network, and we have one for expats or internationals, and we have 2 women networks. And one is like more a closed network that is based on your job or position. It's more for the top women. And then we have a general women's network, which is very active at our company. That's sometimes saying less is more, ladies, in terms of impact, There is a new group starting for around, I think, neurodiversity. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so, and I see Ronald, a question from Matai.
Yeah.
So you mentioned KPN is assigning budget to ERGs based on membership.
Yeah.
Specifically for LGBTIQ plus community, people choose or afraid not to be out in the workplace, thus will not become a member of the ERG. That being said, the ERG should also therefore employees who are not out in the workplace. How do you deal with that? So I think the question is like it's great that you're out and about and get the budget, but what about the people who still choose not to come out in the workplace, which by the way, I think is more than we imagine, even in the Netherlands as well.
Oh yeah, I think the latest research showed up like it's 70% who is out of the closet in the workplace in the Netherlands. So still a lot of work to do. Yeah, it's a very good question. And also this is something where we deal with. But what I try to do is that the activities we do on the ERG are more based on the network. So then, yeah, you're part of the network, so you should be a member. But what I do next in my job, because my job is not only ERGs, is focusing also on this in communications and creating a culture where people, well, could feel safe. And I mean, I'm not responsible for this whole company, because also our leadership is, and also operational managers or colleagues. So everyone is can do something in this. So what we do is focusing on interventions or communications, actually, that we say, hey, it is safe to be to come out of the closet or to be yourself. And I want to mention one example specifically. Maybe you might saw it because it was on social media. It was kind of like a thing, but on all our ports in the offices where people had to go with their cards to get entrance, we put stickers on them made of so they look like wooden closets, so everyone could come out of the closet, and this was actually very helpful. We did this during coming out day. And what happened there is that we were telling we are there, and of course we also have this email address, and then people were emailing like, hey, I see this, I think it's very good you're doing, I'm not out yet, but I want to let you know I really appreciate this. So I think those like nudges putting in this organization is very important, so they know it is a possibility, but also it's your choice if you want to or not. I just strive for having this safe and inclusive environment and leadership. So that's the other one I would like to mention, is that we made like also based on the workplace pride input, like guidelines for managers how to deal with having a coming out, or with if you feel like there's something going on. But this is also really personal and very hard to reach sometimes, because also, especially in technical companies, you also have managers who are very good on the content they're producing, but less on the people agenda. So this is always a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, as a workplace pride, we talk about the benefit of coming out. You know, psychological safety is connected to individuals' performance, but also we hear a lot of, for example, we did a conference in Japan, and then in Japan, people sort of secure their psychological safety by not coming out. It sounds, but all we can do sometimes is to keep sending signals that we are putting effort in this area, and then make it a little bit like tangible and visible, which can be all gender bathroom, for example, just putting the all gender bathroom in place, or HR professionals and in ERG groups, people to use in an email signature, they can add their gender pronouns just to signal like we respect diverse genders and then gender expressions. But also inclusive language, use more inclusive language in job description and application form, but also we can go a little bit further by implementing more diverse but also fair employee benefits for diverse families, for example. Even with that, if people choose not to come out, I think it comes to their personal choice. and it's nothing to be forced, but secure and then sort of foster that more inclusive environment for people so that they feel safe.
Yuli, if I may also add, I think this was way back when I used to work for Shell, and I'm not sure anymore if this is still being done by the network, because on top of everything that you and Ronald said, I think there also has something to be said about people from the community who may not feel comfortable coming out, but still want to be aware of what's happening, what's the Pride Network doing. In Shell before, our distribution, sort of like our membership, there was the open invitation when you join the Proud Network if you want to be out or not. And if your choice was not to be out, then you were in a specific distribution group that only the lead of the Pride Network has a list of. And therefore, when we send out comms, there's one comms for everyone else who's out. And then the same comms comes out to that group of people in the community, but are not out in the workplace. So there's no gap on awareness and sort of like making sure that everyone is just feels included in the Pride Network, whether they're out or not. So maybe that's something that you can try out as well if you're looking for alternative solutions.
Awesome. So so Jose, so as an HR professional and an active ERG person, participant or leader, what are the challenges that you face, or what are the things that you're being mindful about to keep the sort of momentum going? It's not just a coming out day or Pride Month or Pride, they're big events or signature sort of months and weeks, but your job is not seasonal, right? It's an entire year activity. So where do you find difficulty in keeping the sort of momentum going? Keep the momentum going.
I think it's really, I mean, in general, when it comes to the relationship between ERGs and senior sponsors, and how do you continuously engage them? I do think that as ERGs, you have to have a solid plan, and that's where sort of like the role of doing the benchmark and having those results come into play. As I've mentioned, just being able to do the benchmark gives you objective data, helps you understand your baseline, where you're coming from, but then helps you define as a network where you want to go. And I think when engaging with leaders, whether or not they're already on board or whether it's their first time to encounter an ERG, those are the data points, or that story is what you need to be clear with. Number one tip for engaging with leaders: senior leaders do not have all the time in the world. So if you do get time with senior leaders, make sure that your story is clear about the network, where you are, what have you been doing. But all on the flip side of that, make sure that your ask is clear, because at the end of that, 30-minute or 45-minute session where you have with a leader that you're engaging with, for sure, what they will ask you at the end of that is, what do you need me to do? So before you engage your leaders, make sure that you understand also, where are they in their journey? Because you will have leaders like the likes of Hanneke, who are already very proactive, does not need to be, will not even ask you about the business case because they already understand it. Meanwhile, you have other leaders on the other end of the spectrum where they might still have questions about the business case. Why do we need to do this? And so you need to understand where the leader is at, and you need, as an ERG, you need to meet them at that level, to not overwhelm them, and to make sure that they completely understand the role that they can play in enabling things for you as a network. And again, having those benchmark results just helps with that, because then you have clear understanding of what your baseline is and where you want to go, and what is their role in helping you as a network get to where you want to go. Yeah, so I think that's sort of like, in general, what I can share for that one.
No, that sounds amazing. And then I think to external people, Unilever's success in this area is like wow, that's great, but they can do it because they have this type of culture, Unilever. But actually, it's not organic. I don't think it was an organic success, but more like a very strategically calculated and activated within to involve the leaders by, well, in Hanneke's case, you didn't have to sort of educate her, but maybe middle managers or line managers, you need to educate them why LGBTIQ plus inclusion is important. So no, this is great. And then you set clear goals, work towards it, and then share and educate people in the process if needed.
And sometimes
Oh.
just one last point. Sometimes the role of that sort of like best cheerleader you have, sometimes the role of that leader is to talk to their peers and to get them on board instead of you having to sort of like do the explaining. And I think Ronald is nodding his head in agreement. So yeah, that for me is like sometimes that's the ask. You as a leader, what can you do for us? Speak on our behalf. Speak
And
to
then
your peers, get them on board because they have the influence.
awesome. And Ronald, how about your experience?
Yeah, so I totally agree with that, Jose, because I think that's very important. Peer pressure helps sometimes to accelerate the inclusion topic. And also, it's important to be helpful. So what we did last year is, that's a collaboration between all the RGs, is that we created our own DE&Y workshop with our own content specifically for the company. And we trained 6 people of the several networks to give this training to departments. Of course, I do it myself as well, because I love to do that. But what I noticed is that we really were going back to basics sometimes. So really also saying, where are all the letters from in the LGBTQI plus community? And it was a relief for some people because they didn't know that much. And then almost like, okay, educate yourself, but that's also sometimes not the case. So it's helpful also to educate the people a bit and provide the right insight, because also people were like, oh yeah, now I know better, I can handle better to my colleagues, I know better what I can do or not do. So we kept it very practical. And this is a very good instrument because also we reach a lot of people because it's based on department. It's not like voluntary, just the leader says, I want to do this for my department, and then we roll out this. So sometimes I have the sessions with 100 employees at one moment, and then your reach is amazing. So I also think that's important to help people getting better insights on the topic.
Awesome. So for those who are not familiar with the global benchmark, you see Brian from Workplace Pride is in chat. And if you have any questions, you can email Brian about the global benchmark. And also I developed the learning and development program, and I help a lot of member organizations navigate their journey for LGBTIQ plus inclusion. And in terms of education, the most popular module, one of the most popular modules that is taken last year and this year is module 1. So the world of LGBTIQ plus, and it sounds very basic, but it has like a great conversation comes out from the session because Dick is there to just navigate the conversation, but people like to share their personal stories about their journey and about their experience in their workplace as an LGBTIQ plus professional or an ally. So if you have any questions, you can reach me about the learning and development program as well. So. Well, great insights came out from both of you. Thank you so much, and an experience. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to open the floor for this opportunity. If you have any questions to Jose or Ronald, feel free to raise your hand and ask away. Have any questions? Specific, it can be specific questions about their experience or their journey. Anybody?
Yes, so Yuli, hi.
I see,
I have
yeah.
a question for Ronald, once again. Hi, Ronald.
Hi.
Talking about being helpful, so your last point. So it's kind of the chicken and the egg story for me, because executive sponsorship is needed, a budget is needed to really take things off. But in the initial phases, when you don't have that and you really have to influence them by being helpful, how do you mobilize that?
And then you mean the executive leadership? How I mobilize the okay, yeah.
So you want to be helpful as a network.
Yeah.
You want to make people understand, you want to do some training. How do you get people together without
Yeah.
leadership yet?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And my role is a bit difficult, because I'm reporting directly to the board. So so that helps in any way, because I can imagine if you have an organization where you have to do this unpaid work yourself as an ERG to reach the board, this is a little bit harder. But also, I think that where it starts with, and I think that's when I go back to the 4 years when I started, is our commitment session. That's something I want to share here. And this was a personal session with a board where we talked about the topic and on a deeper understanding of level, and really shared their own commitment to creating a better world for people who are marginalized in the workplace still. And this was interesting because it was getting more personal. The people had the right intentions, and now I make 4 times a year an update about the whole the progress we make on the topic, or also things that are harder to tackle. But I can constantly go back to that part, and it's not, to be honest, not really a discussion on that board level. But as the example I mentioned earlier about the theme about Amsterdam Pride for this year, this was a bit harder because this man, white, cisgender, kind of handsome man, says that his kids are getting confused about their gender identity because of all the focus on this. This is a little bit harder. So what I did there is trying to get the peer to use the peer pressure, like you also relied on. So also his peers in marketing helped him to tell him he was a bit a conservative old man and that we're a digital company whose mother, and he could overthink his opinion. So, but this will always keep a challenge. Let be honest. And I'm also sometimes worried about, at one time we're making good progress, but there are also strengths or powers within our society, so also within our companies, that want to go back a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So find and recruit your cheerleaders.
Yeah. And so, so we have a very steady board now. So the work I do is for the same board all the time. Next December, it might change because then all the terms are over for the 6 board members. So we will see what kind of challenges I will face then.
Okay. So thanks so much. And I see three other hands. So I go Marco, Sophia, and then Brian. Okay. So Marco, you have a question?
Sophia was first.
Oh, Sophia was first. Okay. Thank you.
Gentlemen.
Okay.
Thank
Sophia.
Mike, I'm Sophia from Paramount. My question is, we're quite a new ERG and trying to find our feet still and trying to choose our priorities since we're quite a small team. My question is, how, or in your experiences, do larger events have more impact? Like if you put on a really big, showy, flashy event that the company is maybe really proud to demonstrate, or do they have more impact, or are the small things more impactful, like these stickers that you mentioned with the closet door and having these like more on the ground gentle pushes? Like, is there one strategy that's more impactful for employees and gaining senior leadership help, or is it combination?
I'm not sure if Ronald wants to answer first.
Yeah, I just short then because based on this, it's hard to say. It also depends on where your company is in terms of having a respectful culture, or are they really ready, or do you need a lot of convincing a lot? But this, so I think it's important to think of this, because sometimes smaller initiatives can be more. When it's more intimacy, you can create better impact. So it really depends. But what I always say is that involve the leadership and let them make this a statement, because that sets the tone. That makes the smell of the place. So involve them.
What I would add to that is it's like what Ron already said. It's very important to anchor sort of like your strategy into your context. Number one is local context. How is general attitudes here in the Netherlands, but also what is the context for your company? When we started sort of like having regular campaigns every year, we started with our first year was all about awareness and trying to help people understand why is it still relevant to talk about LGBTQIA plus inclusion. So what we did was, and this was way before we had any budget to speak of. So we literally, there's a lot of resources online. Our first campaign was around getting people aware of the issues. And so we took the annual report that ILGA Europe actually prepares on the state of LGBTQIA plus rights across Europe. We displayed the map. We set it up in a central booth in the middle of our office where everyone will pass by, just to make sure that traffic will pass by there. And then people starts to ask, okay, why is this booth here? What is it actually trying to show us? And then so you build the case for it. So our message year one was focused on, it's still important because if you look at this map, it's not broadly across Europe where LGBTQ plus people can be themselves. And then you sort of like try to help them understand, but why does this matter to us as a business? The route we took there was, if you're an LGBTQ plus employee and you want an international experience, being LGBTQ plus limits this. And so as an organization, if we want to prioritize what's best for our talent, how do we actually solve for this problem? And then from that, year two was then focused on International Coming Out Day, on visibility. So we started with awareness. Year two was about visibility. So year two, we just arranged sort of like a simple photo shoot with all the active members of the Pride Network at that time, with a few leaders that we had, and they were for 2 months. They were stickered up in our lifts, in our elevators, and then beside our photos was a quote on why coming out was important for us. So you need to think of your narrative as a network and how you'd like to bring your employees along in the journey.
Thanks, Jose and Ronald. And so Marco, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I get you. So we've organized quite some things internally, also some discussions on our internal Yammer sites, and we have some managers, Western managers actually, who have responsibilities outside of also the Middle East, but are in the Middle East. And in some cases, some reactions have been is that they're not openly reacting to things because they are in the Middle East, because they're on assignment in the Middle East. I've left it out of respect or whatever, you know, I'm not going to push that. But the question I have, is it true that if you're not local, so if you're not a local and things like that, that you would get into problems if you would internally in the company would react to things around this topic? What do you think my reaction should be? Do you agree with me to leave it, or should I push a little bit further or things like that? It's just something that has been playing in my mind. I don't know who this question is for. Anybody that has experience with, you know, having managers in the Middle East and stuff.
Ronald or Jose, if you want to.
Well, it's where I'm in doubt, because I work for a national operating company, so I have not the thing where it comes to really specific cultures, countries, or laws. But when it comes about being vocal, I think it's with all like more sensitive topics that we have like this, let's say 20% who is very vocal in a positive way. We have 20% who are very negative but vocal, and then we have like 60% who is in the middle or are mostly quiet, and we don't know where they're standing for. And we need that 60% to create a better majority in for inclusion. So, and it's hard to reach because sometimes they're also like scared because hey, if I am vocal, what does that mean for me? So it's hard to reach, but we can only invite them and help them then show them the benefits. But
Yeah, but that's not, so the point is not, to convince them or something like that. My point is, if there is legitimacy, and so if you don't have the experience, then maybe somebody else can answer the question. If there is legitimacy in the point that he's making, that he could get into problems being temporarily in the Middle East.
Jose, would you like to share your experience? Otherwise, I can also share other members. I mean,
Yeah, no, so obviously my experience has been very local, but from what I understand from a global framework, there is a framework where you sort of like look at the countries and where they are when it comes to LGBTQI plus rights and inclusion, and where it is safe and not safe to speak up about LGBTQI plus. The way that we're approaching it is that for the sort of like not lowest tier, but for the last tier where it's dangerous, our policy is safety first. So we will not we would not force anyone to put themselves in danger if locally that is possible. However, what I see and what I've heard from our more senior global leaders, for example, our CEO Alan Job or our CFO, when they do travel to those countries, for example, Indonesia, and I think I can share this because Alan has shared this in a town hall. When Alan makes an appearance in Indonesia, sometimes he is wearing our rainbow lanyard, and that is enough as a signal. And what we're seeing is that the more international leaders do it, the more it gets talked about locally. And then the role then of the Global Proud Network is to make sure that when someone from those countries reach out, that we are ready to support. Like, for example, we've recently seen interest in establishing an ERG for Pride in Singapore.
No, but I get that, but that's somebody who goes in and out.
Yeah.
And if I, for instance, look now in how Qatar is dealing with
yeah.
the companies in the statement, then it's.
Sorry, Marco. This topic it alone can be one session.
Okay, yeah.
LGBTIQ plus in sensitive region, how to handle the situation. And unfortunately, time's up. And I see Anna Henry has raised your hand, and then Jian also asked a great question in the chat. So I want to take this, and if you can, Anna and Henry can email me your questions. I will try to. Is it okay to communicate with Jose and Ronald, and then being able to, if they could share your experience, and I'll write back to you if that's okay.
No, that's fine. I actually wanted to respond to Marco's question. But,
I see.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe Anna, you can mail me. Marco,
maybe this can be your next session's topic.
Worley.com.
I'll connect Marco and Anna. That's no problem.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So, well, thank you everybody, and then a special thanks to Ronald and Jose for being here as a panel, and for you participants, active participant. I know my microphone wasn't on, but I could tell almost your active participation. You're engaged, and then clearly very interested in this topic. So we will try to summarize what we've discussed, and also learning in the coming weeks, so that you stay engaged, and we'll stay in touch. And thank you again for your time, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.